You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, despite the news of no income tax rises in the coming budget, The Guardian says workers will still face an increase totalling £7.5 billion thanks to a 2-year freeze on tax thresholds. The Times says Chancellor Rachel Reeves will now have to rely on stealth taxes on workers and pensioners to make her sums add up on November the 26th. The Telegraph says another plan is a levy on high-value middle-class homes, mainly in London and the South East, which could raise £25 billion for the Treasury's coffers. And after the market reaction saw government borrowing costs jump, the Financial Times says investors have lost faith in the budget, with the U-turn being seen as weakness. The Express carries a plea from an 82-year-old terminally ill grandmother asking peers not to block the assisted dying bill as it returns to the House of Lords in another attempt to make it law. And finally, Susie's paper, The Mirror, speaks exclusively to EastEnders star Shona McGarty about her appearance on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So let's welcome Henry and Susie. Good to see you both. We're not talking about I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. You'd be pleased to know. Susie says good under her breath. We're going to start with, well, we're going to start and probably finish with tax. Front page of The Guardian, first of all. Susie, take us into this. Despite not raising taxes on income tax, we're still going to pay for it.
Yeah, we're still going to pay more income tax. That's it. I mean, the manifesto promise of not raising income tax on working people is still going to mean some more working people pay more income tax. Because if you are Labour and you're busy dancing on the head of the pin, which is all that you have left at this point, you're saying that, well, you know, we're not raising the rates of income tax. What's happened is that it was going to be that in a couple of years' time you were going to have to raise the thresholds at which point you start paying tax, because obviously the value of money has just gone up to the point where, you know, what's the way of saying it? My head is just completely frozen.
Inflation.
Inflation, thank you very much. The amount of money that you have is not the value of the money that you used to have. And so they're going to have to raise the thresholds. But what Rachel Reeves has done, because of this asinine business we've had over the last couple of weeks about the budget and what we are or are not going to be charging for, she's decided instead what she will do is sort of throw forward by saying she is not going to change those thresholds, that therefore in a couple of years' time so many more people will be paying so much more tax that you're kind of cooking the books in the future in such a way that your sums now are slightly easier to handle. And it's guff.
Henry?
I mean,
would you care to comment?
I mean, I agree completely. I think essentially we as journalists need to find some way of describing this as raising income tax. Now, effectively, Rishi Sunak is the first person who did this. It was previously the case for about, give or take 40 years, that income tax thresholds were index linked to inflation, which meant that you were paying your income tax threshold based on your actual income rather than just what the number was. And Rishi Sunak broke that during his chancellorship, and Labour have continued it. And Rachel Reeves initially said, I'm going to end this in 2028. It was already a bit far away for something that she was really probably going to do, but now she simply said she's going to extend it to 2030. So it's not made an immediate difference because it was still going to be frozen until 2028 either way, so people would still be paying the same money this year, but it's just retreating ever into the future. And it's worth remembering the reason that we got rid of that we unfroze them in the first place. In the 1970s, it was Labour MPs. It was two left-wing Labour MPs who said that stealth taxes are basically a way of raising money from working people and lying while you do it. And it was they who collaborated with the Conservatives to do that index linking in the first place. And so I think that it's, you know, Rachel Reeves is not going to raise income tax. She is raising income tax. That is exactly what allowing inflation to pull people into higher income tax bands is.
Yeah, and it also
but in name, she's allowed
not
to say
she's allowed not to say it. And I think
it's a fudge of it. But what it's going to mean is that in a couple of years' time, it should mean that every single pensioner will be paying income tax, which a lot of newspapers will be finding very difficult to stomach, and a lot of pensioners find difficult to stomach.
We
were saying in the break I mean, it's almost a good news story. I can remember my grandmother complaining about like a 5p rise in the state pension when I was a girl under Thatcher. If we got to the point where pensions are now so generous that they are required to pay the same level of income tax as a worker, then that must be a good thing. We have lifted many pensioners out of poverty, but it's
although
not
they're not paying national insurance.
They're not paying national insurance.
You're doing some spin for the government, aren't you?
Well, there's one way of looking at it, isn't there? And then there's the fact that obviously their mum like to vote and they're going to...
Let's look at the Times, and they are talking about this stealth tax on both pensioners and workers. Henry, the figures that you quoted... tax thresholds for 2 years until 2030 will leave 10.1 million people as higher rate taxpayers, almost 1 in 5 adults. The decision will raise 8.3 billion, and it'll also mean that every adult in receipt of the state pension will pay income tax by 2027-28.
Yeah, and I think that the thing about this is raising income tax rates properly is at least honest, and it means that you're impacting everybody. Whereas here, the people who are affected by these increases are... It's not entirely random, but it's just, do you have the misfortune to have a nominal income which is such that you will fall over this line at some point over the next few years? If so, despite the fact that you're not taking home any more money in real terms, the government will start taking more of your money in tax. And of course, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. People have record high, paying a record share of their post-tax income on housing compared to other times. You know, costs are expensive. And so I think that what this does, and what I really can't emphasise enough, is it's essentially just a dishonest way of raising this tax. It's not a partisan point. The Conservatives did it first. But it means that you will get politicians who will be able to say, we've kept our manifesto commitment not to raise income tax on working people, whilst at the same time, millions of working people and pensioners will be paying more income tax than they were before on the same income.
And Susie, would you go as far as saying it's dishonest?
Yeah, I think it affects the trust that people have in politicians, which Wes Streeting was talking about this week, saying we need to restore that. And I think the whole kerfuffle we've had about preparing us for a rise in the basic rate, a rise in 2p rate in income tax, and then saying we're going to change our mind because things have changed, and then saying we're going to raise it up in this stealthy way instead, so you are still going to pay more, we're just not going to pronounce it. I think that does an awful lot to undermine public confidence that the government of any party, but the government knows what it's doing. I mean, it's looked chaotic. The messaging has been incredibly bad. But we've also got to remember now that they were going to stop this freeze in 2028, and then the general election was due in 2029. Now, by extending this freeze, we're going to be going into the next general election, if they make it that far, tight word, we're having not changed this at all. And whatever impact this has had on the growth of the economy, the stagnation, is going to continue up past the point of the next general election. And that's not where Keir Starmer, in an ideal world, would have wanted to be. So it's all very well to say, oh, the situation has changed, we're going to change the budget as a result. I really think, considering the amount of effort and commitment Rachel Reeves and her team had gone to sell this 2p rise in income tax, regardless of the change of circumstances, she should have stuck with it, she should have done it, she should have been honest, she should have said, I'm putting country before party, and if there was some extra good news in it, it should have a bit of extra room then to play with and produce something in a benefit in a year or two's time as recompense if things were going to continue looking good. But as it is, she's just had this sudden switcheroo based on a couple of weeks' worth of good figures, which could in a month's time look even worse again. And the whole thing just looks chaotic, and she's uncommitted, and that she's put party before country, which is the opposite of what Labour's been trying to sell us.
Well, let's look at some of the other things that she's planning. The Telegraph, front page, new tax on homes to hit the middle classes, and there is a fear that she might actually alienate the middle classes by doing this, Henry. Yeah,
so this is a new levy on Bands F, G and H council houses, which is sort of the very top of the range, which is forecast to raise 25 billion, given that it's a 600 million surcharge, that is presumably over some period of time. But nonetheless, it is essentially... One of the unfortunate things about Britain is that we have a runaway housing market. House prices have gone through the roof. But our only property tax is council tax, and it's pegged to valuations from 1991. So it doesn't really raise all that much money. No politician is ever going to touch those council tax bands overall, but basically Rachel Reeves is trying to isolate the bands at the top of the range and get a bit more money out of them. So Obviously, the challenge with that is that because so British house prices have had such a runaway cost increases, face value increases, it means that, yes, a lot of the people who bought some of the houses at the top of that range will just be very rich. But other people, and this has always been the problem, will be people who simply bought them a long time ago. And this is where we come back to pensioners. You know, if you bought a house, you could have bought a house for sort of 80,000 in the 1990s or before, which is now worth several £1 million. And there is a stern economic argument to be made that actually maybe that person should be paying a tax rate that encourages them to downsize. But nonetheless, that's what's always made moves like this very tricky. It's why the Conservatives haven't done it previously. And I suspect that given that Labour now has a lot of Labour MPs with very narrow majorities in bits of the country that don't normally vote Labour because of how big they won, some of those MPs will be very sensitive to this sort of thing.
Susie, your thoughts? Because this is going to be a charge on top of council tax, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the Telegraph and I think the Tories are overcooking this. I think when it comes through, the banding that they're going to do to charge properties that are, you know, maybe £2 million or more up. If you've got a £2 million house and you can't afford the charge on it, then you probably can't afford the upkeep on that anyway. It's a huge property.
So what about
even
the point
in parts of
that
central
Henry
London.
makes, that, you know, they obviously will not have bought the property at £2 million and they might, you know, it's appreciated in the time that
Well, then they've got a shed load of cash. Sell it and go on holiday. But, you know,
sympathetic, isn't she?
I think the economic argument is that therefore they can downsize, that produces more movement in the housing market, families further down the ladder and all the rest of it is beneficial to everybody. But also, you know, they talk about, you know, middle-class families. Middle-class families, most of them are not in a £2 million house. I'm sorry. The newspaper editors and Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, might think the £2 million house is absolutely normal, but it's not. It really isn't normal for most middle-class families in the South East or London.
Let's talk about what the markets think of this decision not to raise income tax. It's given them jitters a bit, hasn't it, Henry?
It has. The cost of government borrowing has gone up since this announcement, which is basically the bond markets showing their nerves about this. And again, there's several reasons for this, one of which is simply that they're now... This is a government that has already U-turned several times. You know, when the government U-turned on the welfare measures, for example, one of the things that we didn't maybe comment on enough is that the government had announced that in a fiscal measure. And so the government had already passed the threshold whereby a fiscal measure announced by the Chancellor did not happen, which was quite significant. And here again, the bond markets, they're looking for signals of strength or weakness. And this is a signal of weakness, because I don't think that any of us disagree that if Rachel Reeves thought she could have got away with raising income tax, she would have done it. Because for all the reasons that Susie says, it would have given her a bigger buffer. She is almost certainly going to have to do it later anyway. There will also be some concern, I imagine, that effectively what we're seeing, we've just discussed the stealth taxes, but there's also lots of other little fiddly measures that they're trying to do to raise money. And the problem with those is that it's easier to avoid them. The more narrowly targeted a tax is, the better people are at managing to hire people who can help them avoid it. And you have more unintended consequences, and it makes our tax code much more complicated. So all of this is basically sending a signal to the markets that the British government, despite having a huge majority in the House of Commons, does not feel able to do something as basic as raising income tax in order to meet its spending obligations. And that is a very bad long-term signal to be sending. And this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, of course, because the more government borrowing costs, the higher our debt servicing costs, and the more the government needs to bring in money in tax.
Yeah. It's another reason that Rachel should have stuck with what she had said she was going to do. The markets, businesses, everyone had put themselves in a position over a few weeks where they expected this to happen, in fact, probably over the past few months. And then, you know, when Fed suddenly changed at the last minute, creates so much chaos and uncertainty that then you have this situation. It would have saved her money in the long run to have done something bold, to have faced down the problem, the backbenchers in her party and said, no, we have to do this. This is in the national interest, and just taken the hit.
I suppose the Chancellor in her defence would say if the circumstances change, then you do have to change your mind.
Yeah, but this hasn't been a graceful pivot from one perspective to another. This has been an absolute, you know, something new.
I'd like to sort of get a definition for that,
we
actually.
We need that as a GIF now.
Yeah, we do. We should have filmed that. Susie and Henry, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, we'll turn to the sensitive subject of assisted dying and this plea from an 82-year-old terminally ill grandmother on the front of the Daily Express. Stay with us.
Those vivid colours of summer have faded now, but the trauma for everyone who witnessed what happened here hasn't gone away.
Devastation. We lost 3 of them.
Ruda Cabana's guilty pleas mean they won't have to relive what they saw in court, but everyone here tells you they'll carry it for the rest of their lives. You see people running red lights time after time after time. This is an offence that sometimes has the most awful of consequences.
When you speed through a pedestrian crossing, there is a risk that you could batter somebody to death. She filled our lives with light. She was innocent, she was happy.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
He had a beautiful death. He fell asleep in my arms. This is about a dying person's choice to die peacefully when they want to, on their terms.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Let's take a look at the Telegraph first off in this section. And this story regarding asylum for refugees under Shabana Mahmood getting much tougher, that migrants granted asylum will no longer automatically get a permanent right to stay in the UK. This is to be announced.
Yep, so the rules at the moment are that when you are given asylum, which is itself is quite a long, drawn-out process to wait for asylum. Once you get approval, if you're here for 5 years after that, you get an automatic right to remain, and obviously you can then apply for citizenship and become naturalised, lots of other things. But the changes that are proposed are that it'll be very similar to what happens in Denmark, where if you get given asylum, you're allowed to stay for 2 years, and then that's it, you're out again. You only get a 2-year holiday, if you like. You're not given asylum, you're given a brief respite from the thing you're seeking asylum from, and then you have to either reapply or go through some other process or leave. And that's what the proposal is, so that you're no longer having permanent asylum. And the assumption is that what's happened in Denmark is that the rates of asylum have severely reduced and the rates of deportation have increased, and therefore they think that by by changing that in Britain, you'll attract fewer people seeking asylum in the first place, those pull factors that people keep talking about.
Henry, it's thought to be the toughest model in Europe, and we're exactly mimicking it, aren't we?
Denmark's model. Yes, it is. So I think what it says here is effectively, it's not quite as severe as I think it might sound. It's essentially that you are given a time-limited, effectively, asylum visa, and then this is reviewed. I don't know if it's necessarily immediately withdrawn, and you have to go through the whole thing again, but it is reviewed, and the idea is that when the Home Office deems your home country to be safe, then you will be returned, and it's basically recasting asylum as something which is, instead of being an effective pathway to permanent citizenship, you can simply leave that country forever, it is that this country is a place of refuge during a particular crisis. And this is part of a broader pattern in immigration policy. The government had recently extended the qualification for indefinite leave to remain to 10 years. There's now talk about them extending the waiting period for entitlement to state funding and welfare to 10 years. And it's part of an overall move away from the current British model, which is conversely unusually liberal, which is simply that if someone arrives here and then manages to stay here for 5 years, there is basically an automatic pathway to permanent residency and then to citizenship. And we're seeing a move away from that model on all fronts, and this is simply one of those. But yes, Denmark is, I think, an example which is interesting for Labour people, because the sense that 5 years ago, the far right were polling at about 20%, and the centre-left was in real trouble. In the most recent polls or elections, I think the far right came in at under 5%, and the Social Democrats are running Denmark. And the reason that they have done that is because they have simply moved very far to the right on immigration, and they've managed to therefore maintain their centre-left positioning on everything else.
Some of the other elements of their model, they have tougher rules on family reunification. So both the sponsor and their partner are required to be at least 24 years old, which the Danish government says is designed to prevent forced marriages, and the sponsor must also not have claimed welfare for 3 years and must provide a financial guarantee for their partner. Both must also pass a Danish language test, so very much more detailed than the system we are currently under. And this due to be announced on Monday. Let's look at this story in the Express, one that we've covered this evening. Spoken to a woman who wants to have more rights over her manner of death as she awaits that prospect. Susie.
Yeah, and they're always incredibly moving and tragic stories, very difficult to listen to. And I think any of us, if we're in that situation, may well want exactly the same thing. But what's happening at the moment is that the legislation, which has been brought by a private member's bill by Kim Ledbetter, but with government support in the Commons, has been going through the House of Lords, where they're having a lot of debates. I think there's been 942 amendments. They managed to discuss 2 areas of that, I think, today. They were hoping to get through 10, and they managed to do 2. So it's really dragging out. If you are someone who is waiting for the right to die, as this poor lady is, and the lady you've interviewed, the fact that it's not going to be decided quickly and probably not in your lifetime is not helpful. But it does show that the second House of Parliament is doing its job. It's properly scrutinising and properly and calmly discussing things which in the House of Commons causes so much ruckus and upset. It never gets properly discussed.
Susie and Henry, thank you both.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.